It was a Tuesday. One of those deceptive, clear-skied mornings where you expect nothing more than back-to-back meetings and maybe, if you're lucky, a sandwich that hasn't been microwaved into rubber. I walked into Larkwell and Company like I had for the past 6 years. Same ID badge. Same elevator that creaked a little on the 10th floor. Same receptionist who gave me the usual tight-lipped nod. Everything felt familiar, until it didn't. My name's Everett Hale, and my wife, Miranda Vale, is the CEO of Larkwell and Company. Yeah, you read that right. My boss is also the woman I share a mortgage with. Or at least, I used to. I got the summons at 9:02 a.m. A calendar notification from Miranda's executive assistant. Subject: urgent discussion, executive office. I thought it was a project issue. Maybe a client crisis. Or maybe, if I was being naively hopeful, it was finally time for that promotion talk I'd brought up every quarter for the past 3 years. But when I opened her door, I knew. Miranda sat behind her pristine glass desk in a blazer I hadn't seen before, navy with silver trim, like she'd chosen armor for the occasion. She didn't look up at first, just tapped a printed email with her manicured nail. Her tone was ice over steel. I consider this disloyal. Disloyal. Not ineffective. Not unprofessional. Not dishonest. No. Disloyal. I glanced at the paper. It was an internal memo from another company, Dalton Nexus. When I had interviewed with last Thursday, I told Miranda I had a dental appointment, which wasn't a total lie. I did have one, just not at a dentist's office. I opened my mouth to explain, but she cut me off. Don't bother denying it. Security will escort you from the premises. You can collect your personal belongings, but your badge and building access are revoked immediately. No raised voice. No fury. Just calculated dismissal. She pushed my badge across the desk like it was evidence in a trial. You want to know the funny thing? It wasn't getting fired by my own wife that stung the most. It was realizing, in that cold moment under fluorescent lights, that I had stopped being her equal years ago, and I was the only one who didn't notice. When Miranda and I first started at Larkwell, we were both on the grind. Late nights, ramen dinners at our desks, brainstorming client campaigns while folding laundry. Back then, we were a team. We even called ourselves Hale and Vale like we were our own agency. I loved that version of us. But then things shifted. Slowly. Quietly. Like water eroding rock. She rose faster. Got noticed by the board earlier. Started getting CC'd on emails I wasn't. At first, I was proud. Of course I was. She's brilliant. No denying that. But then came the subtle exclusions. Client dinners I wasn't invited to, strategic planning sessions where I was looped in later, raises and titles passed over with the explanation, we don't want to look like we're favoring you. Favoring me? I had landed the Richter account. I'd brought in Stratos Bank after 3 months of cold calls and coffee meetings. I had single-handedly salvaged a $1 million client after one of the junior execs forgot to deliver assets on deadline. But none of that was counted. Why? Because Miranda and I shared a bed. I was the conflict of interest in her story of success. She told me once, after a third denied raise, that she couldn't be seen elevating her husband. I asked her, dead serious, then what am I doing here? She didn't answer, but she did start referring to me in meetings as Everett from Strategy. Not my husband. Not Everett Hale. Just a staff title. Disposable. Replaceable. Shrink-wrapped into a box. Still I stayed. I justified it. Said I was being supportive. That I was sacrificing for the bigger picture. But looking back, I was being silent while I was slowly erased. 3 years of quarterly raise proposals. You know the kind. Nicely formatted PDFs with market data, performance graphs, client revenue tied directly to my work. Every time, the same rehearsed lines. Budget's tight. We're focusing on infrastructure. You're valued, Everett. Just not this quarter. Yet I watched as newer staff, many who shadowed me, got better titles, bigger bonuses, newer offices. One of them even got the private parking spot I was promised in my last review. Miranda said it was out of her hands. I said nothing. Until I didn't. One night, after another lukewarm conversation about my invaluable behind-the-scenes role, I opened my laptop and updated my resume for the first time in 6 years. Not out of spite. Out of self-respect. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Reed Dalton. Said he'd been following my campaigns for a while and wanted to talk. That they were thinking of expanding their internal marketing division and needed a strategist who could build something from the ground up. I took a half day off. Told Miranda it was for a dental appointment. I wore a tie and everything. Even brought floss just in case she asked questions. The interview went well. Too well. They asked about my experience. I told them. They pulled up some of my public work and praised the clean data-driven approach. Reed leaned in and said, "You've been the ghost behind Larkwell's wins, haven't you?" I smiled. "I've definitely contributed." He laughed. "You're polite. I like that. But I can see it. Your fingerprints are all over their growth." He ended the meeting with a handshake and these words, "We'll be in touch. And I hope next time we meet, it's as colleagues." And then, Tuesday happened. Miranda found out. Whether it was through HR chatter, an email leak, or just plain paranoia, I don't know. But what I do know is she didn't ask why. Didn't say, "Everett, what's going on?" Didn't say, "Are you unhappy?" Didn't say, "Why didn't you tell me?" No. She went full CEO. Revoked my badge. Labeled me disloyal. Made a scene without making a scene. Surgical and clinical. But the thing she never realized was that I wasn't interviewing because I was trying to hurt her. I was interviewing because I was already hurt. I didn't need her approval. I needed space to breathe. To be seen again, not as her husband, not as a PR liability, but as the professional I knew I was. Now, sitting at home in sweatpants, I opened my laptop and looked at the PDF of my final denied raise request. Page 4. The summary slide. Projection. If provided a 20% salary adjustment, Everett Hale will bring in an additional $3.2 million in revenue growth over the next 12 months. The timestamp? 8 months ago. You want to guess what the actual numbers were? $3.6 million. And that was just from 2 clients, Richter and Crestline. I delivered. I over-delivered. And I got canned for looking for a new pasture. But here's what Miranda didn't know. Reed didn't just want to offer me a role. He wanted me to build the entire division. From scratch. He wanted my voice in branding, in client relations, in campaign direction. Not just to execute, but to shape vision. Something I hadn't been allowed to do at Larkwell for years. I stared at my inbox, then hit reply. Subject, Thursday meeting. Message. Hi Reed. Thursday still works. Looking forward to the next conversation. Everett. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the faint reflection in the laptop screen. Miranda called it disloyalty, but I call it choosing myself. And if that makes me the villain in her boardroom, then so be it. I'd rather be the villain in her story than the ghost in my own. It's strange, the things you remember when your world starts shifting. I didn't remember the 6 years of working late to clean up someone else's mess. I didn't think about the dozens of campaigns I brought across the finish line. No. What I remembered most, in that moment, was how quiet the office suddenly became when I picked up that cardboard box. You know the one. The "you've been fired" box. I had left it under my desk for years. Always joked that I'd use it when we moved floors during expansions. Turns out, it had a much colder purpose. I kept it classy. I didn't sweep everything into it like I was storming out. No dramatic slamming of desk drawers. Just slow, intentional movements. Framed photo of my brother and I from a hiking trip in Oregon. The branded coffee mug Miranda gave me 2 years ago. To my favorite strategist, it said, "Now just a dull joke." A couple of notebooks, my blue pen, and the ceramic paperweight in the shape of a lion I'd gotten at a company retreat. 6 items. 6 years. That's all it took to erase it. People watched me, but no one said a word. No one dared. Some gave me a look, concern, maybe regret. But no one stepped forward. Except for Leah. She worked in UX, brilliant mind. Kind heart. She slipped me a sticky note as I closed the last flap on my box. "You didn't deserve this." It was written in green ink. I folded the note carefully and placed it inside the mug. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just stood, looked around the room I helped shape, and gave a nod to no one in particular. Then I left. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the fact that my own wife was upstairs pretending like I'd never mattered. Or maybe it was because I felt a shift inside me, something breaking off, something being born. The door opened. I stepped out, the box tucked under my arm like a symbol of quiet defeat, or quiet victory, depending on how you framed it. As I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. "Reed Dalton, can you meet Thursday?" I stared at the screen, then typed back. "Yes, noon works." And right then, right as I hit send, another text came through. This time, from Aria, one of the junior associates in client management. She'd been shadowing me for months. Smart girl. Good instincts. Her message? Everyone's talking. What happened? I ignored it. Not out of malice. I just wasn't interested in being the next round of office gossip. I placed the box carefully in the back seat of my car and closed the door with intention. Not anger. Not shame. Just finality. You know, when I first joined Larkwell, Miranda and I used to carpool. We'd drive in together, listening to old rock ballads, talking about client ideas and what we wanted our futures to look like. But over the last year, separate cars, separate calendars, separate everything. It's like we stopped being us the minute she stepped into that corner office. I used to think love could survive anything. Turns out, it can't survive being managed like a staff member. Driving home, I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. It felt cleansing. Like I was finally stepping out of a long, airless meeting that had lasted 3 years. When I got to my apartment, I placed the box on the kitchen island and stared at it. Everything I had brought into that office over 6 years was now contained in a single cardboard square. That should have felt like failure. But it didn't. It felt like I was finally packing up someone else's expectations and getting ready to live by mine. I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, "What I want now." I didn't fill it in yet, but I would. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting on a performance review. I wasn't waiting on a spouse to validate my worth. I wasn't waiting for a meeting invite to prove I belonged. I was going to make my own. Starting Thursday. By the time Thursday rolled around, I had reread Dalton's message at least 10 times. "We've got something you might want to see." Not, "We'd like to learn more about you." Not, "Thanks for your interest." No, Reed wasn't fishing for talent. He knew what I could do. And now, after Miranda had done what she did, I was free to prove it, without guilt, without hiding, without looking over my shoulder in case she walked into the room and suddenly decided I was overstepping. That morning, I pulled my best blazer from the back of my closet. Not the one I wore for office presentations, this one was tailored, dark gray, subtle plaid lining. It said, "I don't need your approval, I'm already hired." I shaved. I actually shaved. That's how serious it felt. When I arrived at Dalton Nexus headquarters, I realized this was a whole different league. Larkwell had rented office space on the 6th floor of a dated corporate tower with beige carpets and a view of the alley behind a seafood place. Dalton Nexus? They owned a glass tower with rooftop gardens and an art installation in the lobby that probably cost more than Miranda's Tesla. I checked in at the front desk, got my visitor badge, and was greeted by a sharply dressed woman named Naira, who introduced herself as Reed's executive coordinator. "Mr. Dalton's expecting you, Mr. Hale." Not Everett. Not Miranda's husband. Just Mr. Hale. It felt good. Cleaner. Like I was being given my name back. We took the elevator to the 28th floor. The door opened to a wide, open-concept space filled with glass, greenery, and people who didn't look like they were just surviving their careers. They looked like they owned them. Reed met me at the entrance of a modest but beautiful office that overlooked the river. "Everett," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Thanks for coming on short notice. Thanks for having me. And please, don't hold the blazer against me. I overdressed." He chuckled. "I respect the commitment." We sat. No pitch deck. No presentation. No resume review. Just two people who had known of each other from across professional lines for years. "I heard about your exit from Larkwell," he said after a moment. I raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast." He nodded. "It wasn't my place to mention it Tuesday, but I knew. In fact, that's part of why I moved this meeting up." I said nothing. Let him talk. "We've been reevaluating our agency partnerships for months. Larkwell's work was strong, but inconsistent, and that inconsistency stopped with you. The moment you were gone, our account rep changed, and our campaign suffered immediately." "That was quick," I said. "We have tracking metrics," Reed replied. "We noticed the impact of your absence within 48 hours. He leaned forward then, clasping his hands. "I'll be direct with you. This isn't an interview. It's a job offer." I blinked. He wasn't bluffing. He pulled out a folder, opened it, and slid it across the desk. "Director of Strategic Development. You'd be building and leading our internal marketing team. Total freedom. Budget authority. No handcuffs. Salary packages inside. Take the night to think it over." I looked down. The number staring back at me was nearly double what I made at Larkwell. More than I had ever dared to ask Miranda for, because I knew the conversation would be spun into a moral debate about nepotism. Reed leaned back, letting me absorb it. It's not charity, he said. It's market rate for someone with your record. You're not here because you're available. You're here because we've been watching for a while. I swallowed. Not because I was nervous, but because I finally felt seen. Not tolerated. Not tolerated in silence, but wanted. Can I be honest? I asked. Reed nodded. Please. I tapped the paper. This is the first time in 3 years someone looked at my work and called it valuable without making me feel like I was asking for too much. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just said, then let this be the last time you settle. I took the folder. Didn't sign it then and there. Out of respect. Out of professionalism. Out of the fact that I wanted to walk into this decision with clarity, not reaction. As I left the building, the sun hit just right. I looked out over the riverwalk and thought about how Miranda used to call me a dreamer when I wanted to pitch to Dalton Nexus directly. They're out of our league, she'd said once. No? I was walking into the heart of their operation with an offer to lead. And Miranda? She had no idea what was coming. 3 days. That's how long it took for the ripple to become a wave. On the surface, it looked like a standard business transaction, one marketing contract shifting to another agency. Happens all the time, right? But when the account represents 30% of your annual revenue, it doesn't just sting, it slices. And when that account leaves because the very strategist who built it, me, was escorted out like some liability, well, then it's not just a business loss. It's personal. I was sitting at my new desk at Dalton Nexus. Yes, my desk. Full window view, sleek walnut finish, ergonomically designed chair. Not a cubicle. Not a hand-me-down station in the corner. This office had a door, and the nameplate outside said Everett Hale, Director of Strategic Development. It still didn't feel real. Until 11:02 a.m., when I received a CC on an outgoing client communication. Subject, Transition of Services. To Miranda Vale, CEO, Larkwell and Company. From Reed Dalton, CEO, Dalton Nexus. CC. Everett Hale, Director of Strategic Development. Dear Ms. Vale, after thorough internal review and strategic realignment, Dalton Nexus has made the decision to terminate our agency partnership with Larkwell and Company, effective immediately. We are grateful for the work your team has provided over the past several years and wish you continued success. All marketing assets and live campaign responsibilities will transition to our new internal department, overseen by Mr. Everett Hale. Please arrange the secure transfer of all materials by end of business Friday. Regards, Reed Dalton, CEO, Dalton Nexus. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. Not because I was shocked, but because the poetic timing of it all landed with the weight of poetic justice. This was Miranda's moment. Her inbox, her boardroom, her weekly executive update. All of it was about to catch fire. And I hadn't lifted a single match. I didn't say a word against her. Didn't beg Dalton Nexus to drop Larkwell. Didn't craft a vindictive memo behind the scenes. All I did was exist. And that was enough. A knock at my door broke my thoughts. It was Tessa, one of my new team members. Bright, sharp, and about 5 steps ahead of most in the room. Everything good? She asked. I smiled. Better than good. Everything's in motion. She gave a nod. I just got looped in on the transition protocol. I'll start pulling the asset list. Appreciate it. When she left, I opened my inbox again, this time to the internal Slack channel. Notifications were buzzing. Quiet messages from people still at Larkwell. From Jared, Design. Just saw the news. That's got a sting over there. From Leah, UX. You're in the driver's seat now, aren't you? From Aria, Accounts. Miranda's door has been closed all morning. No one's talking. We all know why. The irony was too rich. She fired me for disloyalty. Now she was losing her biggest client because of that decision. What do you call that? Karma? Justice? The boomerang effect? I called it clarity. She didn't just lose a strategist. She lost her credibility. Because you don't throw away your MVP and expect the stadium to stay full. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize that. At 2:16 p.m., I got a text from an unknown number. I didn't need to guess. Miranda. I assume you had something to do with this? No greeting. No grace. Just deflection. I stared at it. Thought about responding. Something measured. Something calm. Something like. Only thing I did was my job. Just not for you anymore. But instead, I left her on read. Because nothing speaks louder than silence. By Friday morning, I didn't need insider updates. The industry buzz was doing all the talking. Larkwell and Company, once positioned as a rising star in regional brand strategy, was suddenly the subject of subtle side glances and clipped conversations in glass-walled boardrooms. The chatter wasn't loud, but it was relentless. You know that corporate murmur, the kind that spreads like smoke, no flames in sight, but everyone can smell the burn. And at the center of it all? Miranda Vale. The woman who had once commanded attention like she invented gravity. Now she was struggling to hold the room. I didn't need to hear the exact words. I'd worked there long enough to know how the whispers would sound. They lost Didnt Nexus? That's almost a third of their Q2 pipeline. Who was managing that account? Wait, wasn't it her husband? Yeah, that part was spreading too. Apparently, a few employees, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of spite, had confirmed the details to key clients. And once word got out that Miranda had fired her husband, who was the lead strategist on the Didnt account, 3 days before the partnership was canceled, well, that didn't look like a leadership win. That looked like emotional incompetence. At Didnt Nexus, we weren't celebrating. That's not the culture here. Reed wasn't gloating. My team was just focused, getting the transition done smoothly. No drama, no rubbing salt in the wound. But me? I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the poetic symmetry of it all. Around noon, I got a Slack ping from Tessa. FYI, Miranda reached out. Want a Zoom call about the timeline? You want me to respond? I typed back. You can handle it. Keep it polite. Keep it tight. Nothing extra. She sent a thumbs up emoji and left it at that. Professionalism. Precision. Exactly how I wanted this played. But a few minutes later, another message came in, this time to my phone. Aria, accounts, Larkwell. Miranda's pacing the floor. CMO just stormed out of a meeting. They're in meltdown mode. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Miranda had made her choice. She framed it as company loyalty, painted my quiet job search as betrayal. But what she really did was remove the one person keeping the ship balanced. And the crew? They were starting to notice. By late afternoon, Leah, my old colleague from UX, sent a picture. It was a grainy snapshot of the Larkwell whiteboard from their strategy room. Under the heading Q2 Revenue Goals, red flagged clients. 3 names were circled in red marker. And at the top, Didnt Nexus, terminated. I stared at the photo for a while. Not with pride, but with resolve. I didn't engineer this collapse. I didn't manipulate anyone. I hadn't sent a single bad word about Miranda to Reed or the board. I'd just left and done my job better somewhere else. The truth had done the rest. And now, the company I had built half of, brick by strategic brick, was fraying at the seams because the one person who should have protected its foundation decided her ego came first. What's the old saying? The fish rots from the head. As the day wrapped up, Reed stopped by my office. You good with the timeline? He asked. Yeah, I said. We're moving faster than expected. The team's solid. He leaned against the doorframe. Miranda reached out to me this morning. Very polite. Very stiff. Asked if we'd reconsider. I arched an eyebrow. And he smirked. I told her we've already transitioned 80% of the materials, and that our internal results have already improved since bringing you on board. He paused. She didn't respond. I nodded slowly. I imagined she wouldn't. Reed stepped back. You ever need time, let me know. This kind of situation. I know it's personal. I smiled. It used to be. No? It's just business. And I meant it. Because somewhere between being fired by the woman I loved and being hired by someone who believed in me, I stopped needing closure. I didn't need Miranda to apologize. I didn't need Larkwell to collapse. All I needed was the room to rise. And now I had it. Monday morning started the way I liked it now, quiet. Controlled. I sipped my coffee, no longer racing the clock, no longer dreading Miranda's voice behind a closed door. I had my own door now. And it stayed open. Just before 9 a.m., I checked my inbox. A new message caught my attention. The sender? Carlin Royce, Senior Board Member, Larkwell and Company. Subject, request for meeting, urgent. I leaned back in my chair, sipping slowly. Carlin Royce was no lightweight. A shark in a tailored suit. One of the original founders. He rarely involved himself in internal personnel drama, unless something was on fire. And I knew exactly what was burning. I opened the email. Dear Mr. Hale. I hope this message finds you well. I understand there was an incident last week involving your employment with Larkwell and Company, and I would like the opportunity to discuss this further with you directly. Please let me know if you'd be available for a brief conversation today or tomorrow at your convenience. Best regards. Carlin Royce. Senior board member, Larkwell and Company. Polite. Polished. Desperate. I smiled, but I didn't answer right away. I finished my coffee. Took a call with Tessa about the upcoming branding rollout. Walked through our campaign metrics with the dev team. Only after I'd taken care of my house did I respond to the one that tried to evict me. Hi, Carlin. Thank you for reaching out. I'm available for a brief phone call at 4:30 p.m. today. Let me know if that works. Everett Hale. He replied in 6 minutes flat. That told me everything I needed to know. At 4:29 p.m., my phone rang. Mr. Hale, Carlin said, voice smooth and deliberate. Thank you for taking the time. Of course, I said. What can I do for you? I'll get straight to it. I've reviewed your personnel file, your performance, your contributions to our client portfolio, and frankly, your sudden dismissal came as a surprise. I didn't respond. He continued. I also understand you've accepted a new position. That's correct. A leadership position, I assume? You assume correctly. There was a pause, long enough to make it awkward. We'd like to offer reinstatement, he said, with full salary adjustment and a title promotion. Senior Vice President of Strategic Growth. We're also prepared to offer a 10% signing bonus should you choose to return. It was a generous offer. On paper. But paper never told the whole story. Carlin, I said gently, that's very generous. But I've moved on. I'm leading an internal division now. I have ownership over strategy. I have a team I believe in. And I'm building something new. There was another pause, this one colder. This isn't just about you, he said, dropping the friendly tone. We're trying to protect a structure that's unraveling. Ah, there it was. The truth. They didn't want me back for me. They wanted the stability I brought. They wanted the client comfort I represented. They wanted to plug the leak before the boat sank. Too late. I understand, I said. And I wish you luck. But going back to Larkwell would mean stepping back into a space where I wasn't seen until I left. You don't fix that with a title. He sighed. I suppose I can't convince you. No, I said. But I appreciate the call. He hesitated one more time. For what it's worth, you were never the problem. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, I know. And I hung up. No anger. No gloating. Just peace. Because here's the thing about late offers. They always come too late. Tuesday morning started early. I like being the first one in. There's something clean about an untouched office, the quiet hum of systems warming up, the city outside still rubbing sleep from its eyes. It feels like momentum waiting to happen. I sat at the head of the long table in the strategy room, my room now. Not borrowed space. Not Miranda's overflow meeting room. Mine. Tessa entered first, followed by Wes, then Bria and Nate. My team. Sharp minds, unjaded by old systems. People who wanted to build, not just follow. We had gathered to finalize the rollout of our first full in-house campaign for Dalton Nexus. The rebranding package for a tech client we'd on board just last week. We were ahead of schedule, something I couldn't remember saying once in the last 2 years at Larkwell. At 9:12 a.m., Reed walked in with his coffee. Morning all. Before we dive into the client agenda, we need your take on something, Everett. He slid a thick folder onto the table and tapped the front. Proposal evaluations. I flipped it open. 3 agencies. One of them was Larkwell and Company. I didn't blink. Their contract is up for renewal next month, Reed explained. They submitted a revised proposal, new lead strategist, updated pricing, bundled services. He said it neutrally, but I could feel the question beneath it. What do we do with the company that fired you? The room waited for my reaction. They were professionals, but they were also human. They'd heard whispers. They knew the history. I closed the folder and looked around. Evaluate them the same way we would anyone else. Reed raised an eyebrow. Even after what happened? Especially after, I replied. If we keep them on, it's because they're the best option. If we cut them, it's because someone else earned it, not because of history. Bria smiled, just barely. Tessa nodded and said, You sure you're okay leading that? Absolutely, I said. I don't have time for revenge. I have a department to build. But that wasn't the whole truth. I wasn't cold. I wasn't detached. I just didn't need to engineer anything. Because I had already seen the proposal. I had already reviewed the campaign data. And I already knew Larkwell's numbers were flat. Their presentation templated. The lead strategist was someone I had mentored 2 years ago, a decent worker, but not ready for an account of this size. In short, they weren't the best option. So when the final decision came down from Dalton's executive team 2 days later, I wasn't surprised. The email was short, crisp, corporate. To Miranda Vale. CC, Everett Hale. Subject, Dalton Nexus Agency Realignment. Dear Ms. Vale, following a comprehensive review of submitted proposals, Dalton Nexus has decided to transition its account to an internal strategic division under the direction of Mr. Everett Hale. We appreciate your agency's past efforts and professionalism, and we wish you continued success with your other partnerships. Please coordinate asset transfer with our team by end of day Friday. Sincerely, Reed Dalton, CEO, Dalton Nexus. There it was. Not revenge. Just results. No fire. No rage. Just the quiet closing of a door. I didn't need Miranda to suffer. I just needed to succeed. Publicly, calmly, with such undeniable precision that silence became the only appropriate response. At 4:47 p.m., I got a Slack from Tessa. Miranda's assistant replied. She asked if we could extend the deadline. I replied, tell her the deadline is firm, but wish her well. Then I logged off, went home, poured a glass of wine, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder, because I wasn't surviving someone else's system anymore. I was running mine. I didn't respond to Miranda's last message. You remember it, right? I assume you had something to do with this? It sat there on my phone screen like a pebble tossed into a river, pointless, barely making a ripple. I left it unread, not out of spite, but because I didn't owe her an explanation. I didn't need her to know the inner workings of my new life, my new role, my new clarity. What could I possibly say that wouldn't already be made clear by the fact that she had lost Dalton Nexus, and I was now overseeing everything she used to brag about having a grip on? She didn't deserve a response. She deserved reflection. And I hoped, somewhere behind her thick office door, that she was doing exactly that. But knowing Miranda, I doubted it. Because Miranda Vale had spent years learning how to silence guilt and dress it up in ambition. She could turn a blind eye to reality so long as her name stayed on the wall and the headlines stayed impressive. That's why I didn't gloat. Because someone like her would only see it as fuel, a challenge. She wouldn't hear it as the mirror I intended it to be. So instead of replying to her text, I moved forward. I focused on the team. We had just onboarded a new startup client, Viridian Labs, a scrappy, well-funded group out of San Diego looking to disrupt data privacy in a real way. They'd been referred by one of Dalton's VPs, and they wanted something bold. Braver than the safe campaigns Larkwell had been pitching for years. We brainstormed late into Thursday night. Maria had this wild idea of turning data ownership into a physical metaphor, a digital vault with keys made of people's faces. Wes built out a UI prototype in less than 4 hours. And Tessa coordinated a lightning-fast user survey for feedback over the weekend. I was surrounded by the kind of energy I'd nearly forgotten existed in this industry, the thrill of creation, of possibility, of being in the room before the win, not just showing up to collect it. And in the quiet between team check-ins and client calls, the notifications started coming in. LinkedIn, Twitter, Slack whispers from old colleagues. Did you see the press release? Miranda's stepping back from day-to-day operations. Larkwell board issued a realignment strategy memo to all staff. I didn't even open the full articles. The headlines were enough. She wasn't fired, but she was being shifted. Soft language, polite framing, refocusing on long-term vision, temporary delegation of operations to senior leadership, personal recalibration, all the corporate synonyms for you lost control, and we need someone else at the wheel. I sat back in my chair, watching the city blur behind the glass. If you had told me 3 months ago that Miranda would no longer be leading Larkwell, I would have laughed. Hell, I wouldn't have even entertained the thought. She was built for power, practically born in a power suit. Into the outside world, she was invincible. But now? Now her silence was louder than her presence ever had been. She didn't send another message. She didn't call. She didn't try to apologize or explain or rewrite the story. And I didn't chase one. Because closure doesn't come from the people who hurt you. It comes from what you choose to do after. And I was choosing to build something better. 1 week later, I was invited to speak on a marketing panel hosted by Viridian Labs. Small venue. Thoughtful audience. But they wanted to hear from people who'd navigated the jump from traditional agency structures to internal strategy leadership. The moderator, a sharp journalist named Claire Riddick, asked me halfway through. "Mr. Hale, what advice would you give to someone who's been passed over repeatedly, undervalued by people who claim to support them?" I paused, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what not to say. I didn't mention Miranda. I didn't mention the boardroom betrayal. I didn't even mention Larkwell. Instead, I said, "Stop waiting for recognition. Build something they can't ignore." The audience nodded. Claire gave a soft smile. But I wasn't done. "You have to understand your value before anyone else will. That means keeping the receipts, your wins, your numbers, your hours. It means knowing what you bring to the table even if they keep pulling the chair out from under you." "Has that been your experience?" she asked gently. I looked out over the rows of attentive eyes. "It was," I said, "but it's not anymore." After the panel, several attendees came up to chat. One was a young strategist from New York, Arjun, who said, "I've been working under a founder who reminds me a lot of your story. Visionary, but dismissive. Everything goes through him, even when he's wrong." I asked, "Have you started looking elsewhere?" He looked embarrassed. "I have, but it feels disloyal." I smiled. "There's nothing disloyal about knowing when you've outgrown your cage." He stared at me like something just clicked. And that was the real win. It wasn't the paycheck. It wasn't the office. It was that I was finally using my experience as something more than a cautionary tale. I was using it as a blueprint. That night, back at home, I poured myself a drink and scrolled through my inbox. Buried between two client memos was a LinkedIn notification. Miranda Vale has updated her job title, founder and strategic consultant, Vale Advisory Group. So she'd spun it into something new. I wasn't surprised. She was always good at brand pivots. If anything, I admired her ability to reframe chaos into opportunity. But it was the message underneath that caught my eye. From Jessica L., receptionist, Larkwell. "Just wanted you to know, since you left, 5 more people have followed. Aria's freelancing now, Jared's at Prism, and I'm giving my notice next week. You were the only one who ever made that place feel safe to grow. Thank you for showing us there's life after Larkwell." I read it twice, then a third time, and only then did I allow myself one long, slow breath. Because that was the reply I never expected. It didn't come from Miranda. It came from the people I left behind, people who had once watched me carry a cardboard box through the hallway in silence. Now they were building exits of their own, not out of rebellion, out of realization. Miranda's mistake hadn't just been firing me. Her mistake was believing that my presence was expendable when, in truth, it was the glue. And once that glue was gone, things didn't fall apart overnight. But they did fall. Not with drama. Not with sirens. Just quietly. Like a foundation crumbling beneath a house with too many floors stacked on ego. And all I had to do was walk away. No revenge plot. No PR scandal. No social media tirade. Just results. That weekend, I met Reed and his wife for dinner. Casual place, candlelit tables, no suits in sight. Over appetizers, he raised a glass. "To peace," he said, "in the power of silence." I chuckled, into knowing when not to reply. He clinked my glass. The greatest strategy of all. And as we ate, laughed, and talked about where the next quarter would take us, I realized something profound. You don't need to shout when you're already being heard. 1 year later, I found myself back at the same hotel ballroom where Miranda and I once attended a regional business leadership gala together. She had worn a sharp black dress with shoulder pads that screamed command. I'd worn the only decent suit I had back then, too snug in the shoulders but clean. That night, she was called to the stage to accept a Rising Executive Award. I clapped the loudest. I remember leaning over and whispering, "That's my wife," with a stupid, proud grin. Funny how time changes everything. Tonight, I was the one walking up to the stage. Same hotel, different name on the invitation. Everett Hale, finalist, Industry Vanguard Award. I stood in front of a sea of tables, executives, marketing veterans, tech disruptors, and polished PR reps. And instead of a tight suit, I wore one that fit perfectly, dark charcoal with subtle lapel piping. No nerves. No weight on my chest. Just breath. Just freedom. I shook the presenter's hand, accepted the plaque, and stepped up to the mic. I hadn't prepared a speech. I didn't need to, because what I had to say wasn't rehearsed. It was lived. "Thank you," I began, scanning the room. A year ago, I walked out of a building with a cardboard box in one hand, and the feeling that 6 years of work had been erased in a single breath. There was a small murmur. I smiled. But the truth is it hadn't. Because you can erase value. You can ignore it. You can underpay it. You can pretend it doesn't exist to preserve your own narrative. But real value? It doesn't vanish. It just finds a new home. I paused. I found mine at Dalton Nexus. Not because they gave me a title, but because they let me build something. And building something, that's always worth more than protecting something broken. The applause wasn't loud. It wasn't thunderous. It was steady, quiet, like people nodding inside their own stories. Because they understood. They'd lived some version of it, too. After the event, as the crowd thinned and people gathered around dessert trays and exit doors, a woman approached me. Older. Silver hair. A dark emerald coat. Elaine Wilcox, former board advisor for Larkwell. We'd met only once, briefly, during a quarterly review years ago. She extended her hand. Everett, she said with a slight smile. You handled that with dignity. Thank you, I replied. That was the only part one could control. She looked at me for a beat, then said, I wish we had seen it sooner. I nodded. Most people don't see it until it's already walking out the door. She didn't argue, just touched my arm gently and moved along. That night, I returned home to a quiet apartment, not empty, just peaceful. The kind of quiet that feels like breathing room, not absence. I poured a glass of scotch, sat by the window. The city lights blinked like reminders that life goes on, regardless of who's watching. Then I opened my laptop, typed in Miranda's name. Her profile had changed again. Miranda Vale, independent consultant board advisor keynote speaker. She was still in the game, still branded, still visible, but the shine had dulled. No more articles quoting her as the next big thing. No fresh awards. A few panel appearances, sure, but the momentum was gone. I clicked out, not out of pettiness, out of finality. And then, the message came. 12 months of silence. No calls. No emails. No texts. Until now. Miranda. You always said you wanted to build something. I guess I finally see what you meant. Congratulations, Everett. You earned it. I just wish I hadn't had to lose everything to understand. I stared at it. It didn't sting. It didn't warm me either. It just was. The echo of a closed chapter. The whisper of someone finally hearing what you were saying long after you stopped speaking. I didn't reply. She hadn't said, I'm sorry. And I didn't need her to. She'd already said the part one needed her to say. You earned it. And that was enough. Because for years, I thought if I just kept being good, loyal, patient, measured, that I'd eventually be rewarded. That Miranda would recognize the weight I carried for both of us. That she'd fight for me like I fought for her. But she didn't. She fought for image, for perception, for position. And when she saw me as a threat to all of that, she cut me out. Clean. Efficient. Like I was just another line item in a quarterly report. What she didn't realize was that she didn't fire an employee. She unshackled a leader. Because leaving Larkwell and leaving her wasn't the end of me. It was the start of me. The real me. The version that didn't apologize for taking up space. The version that didn't edit himself to make others more comfortable. And that version? He was just getting started. A week later, I was scheduled to host an internal team summit at Dalton. All departments. Full collaboration weekend. We called it Vision Week. And at the closing dinner, Tessa raised her glass across the table and said, to Everett, for teaching us that strategy isn't just about where we're going, but about who we become when we get there. The team clinked glasses. And I sat there, humbled. Not because they praised me, but because they saw me. Not as Miranda's husband. Not as the guy who used to be behind the curtain. Not as the mistake that got quietly pushed out the door. But as someone who finally walked through the door he built himself. And it all came back to one phrase. The last thing I said to her, in that cold office, as she slid my badge across the desk and called me disloyal. I wish you well. Back then, it sounded like a farewell. Now it sounds like a boundary. A line between who I was and who I refused to become again. Because forgiveness doesn't mean return. And peace doesn't require proximity. So wherever Miranda is today, whether she's rebuilding or retreating, I do wish her well. Truly. Because letting go of someone who didn't value me gave me the room to discover someone who finally did. Myself. And that's the best revenge of all. Not success. Not applause. Not headlines. Self-respect. Freedom. And the quiet, unshakable power of knowing you never needed them to begin with. It was supposed to be a regular day. Nothing extraordinary. Just another long shift at work, followed by the comfort of returning home to my wife, Emma. But sometimes, life takes a turn so sharp that it leaves you breathless. That was the day everything I thought I knew came crashing down. I wasn't feeling well that morning, a throbbing headache and a general sense of fatigue. But I pushed through my meetings, answering emails, and running through endless presentations. By lunchtime, though, I couldn't ignore how drained I felt. I decided to call it a day and head home early. I didn't tell Emma because I didn't think it was necessary. She was probably at home, watching one of her crime documentaries or tinkering with her never-ending list of Pinterest projects. When I arrived, the house was unusually quiet. Normally, Emma would greet me at the door, all smiles and warmth. That was one of the reasons I married her. She had this incredible way of making the mundane feel special. But that day, there was no sound of her footsteps, no smell of her signature lavender candle burning, just silence. I stepped inside, kicking off my shoes, and immediately noticed something odd. A jacket, my brother Liam's jacket, was draped over the back of the living room chair. My stomach tightened. What was Liam doing here in the middle of the day? Liam was charming and magnetic, but he had a knack for popping up uninvited. I assumed he had dropped by to borrow something or kill time. Still, something about the way the house felt made my skin crawl. Then I heard it. Laughter. Emma's laugh, soft and melodic, coming from upstairs. It wasn't the kind of laugh she shared while watching TV. It was intimate, playful. My heart started to race. I hesitated for a moment, trying to convince myself that I was misreading the situation. Maybe they were watching something together, reminiscing about an old family story. I wanted to believe that so badly. But as I climbed the stairs, the laughter turned into muffled voices, and then, sounds I couldn't misinterpret. My head was spinning, my heart pounding in my chest. I stopped just outside the bedroom door, the scene playing out in my head before I even saw it. I opened the door slowly, quietly, not knowing what I was walking into but bracing myself for the worst. And there they were, Emma and Liam, tangled in each other's arms, right there in the bed we had shared for years. The air left my lungs. I didn't yell or make a scene. I just stood there, frozen. Liam turned his head, and when his eyes met mine, he didn't flinch. Instead, he smirked. Smirked, like he had won some twisted prize. My own brother. Something inside me clicked. I didn't explode in anger. I didn't scream. I pulled out my phone and said, "I just sent your wife a video of you too." My voice was calm, eerily calm, but every word was a blade. The smirk vanished from Liam's face, replaced by panic. "What did you do?" he stammered, grabbing for his phone. Emma sat up, her face pale as a sheet, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words that wouldn't come. I didn't wait for an explanation. There was nothing to explain. I stepped back, watching as Liam frantically called Clara, his wife. I could hear her yelling through the phone, demanding answers. His voice cracked as he tried to explain himself, his charm useless for once. Clara wasn't buying it, and neither was I. Emma started to cry, reaching for me, saying it was a mistake, but I didn't even look at her. Mistake? A mistake is forgetting to lock the front door. This was a choice. I turned and walked out of the room, letting them both sit in their panic and guilt. As I made my way downstairs, my head was spinning with a mix of anger, disbelief, and something else, relief. Relief that I wasn't the fool they thought I was. Relief that I had exposed their betrayal in a way they couldn't deny or twist. I sat in the living room, listening to the chaos unfolding upstairs as Liam tried to salvage what was left of his marriage. It's strange how calm I felt in those moments, like my emotions had shut down to protect me from the weight of what I'd just seen. I wasn't thinking about the years I'd spent with Emma or the bond one thought I had with Liam. I was thinking about what came next, how I would take back control of my life and leave their betrayal behind me. When they finally came downstairs, their faces pale and full of dread, I simply looked at them and said, "Now, let's talk about what's next." You'd think being a twin would mean having a built-in best friend for life. That's what people always told me when I was growing up. "You and Liam must be inseparable," they'd say. I'd smile and nod because, honestly, what else could I do? The reality was far from the picturesque bond people imagined. From as early as I can remember, Liam and I were always compared. At first, it was harmless. Who walked first? Who talked first? But as we got older, those comparisons started to sting. I was the smart twin, the responsible one, the natural leader. Liam was the funny twin, the laid-back one, the wild card. At family gatherings, relatives would pat me on the back for my academic achievements and tell Liam, "Don't worry, you'll find your thing," as if being himself wasn't enough. The resentment started to build slowly, like water dripping into a glass. Liam would brush it off with jokes, but I could see it in his eyes, the frustration, the anger. When I won first place in a school science competition, he made sure to sabotage my presentation board the night before. When I started dating my first girlfriend in high school, he charmed her away within weeks. That was Liam's way of leveling the playing field. If he couldn't beat me, he'd take from me. As we got older, the competition became less direct but no less intense. I worked hard, got a good job, and built a stable life. Liam, on the other hand, drifted from one scheme to another, never quite finding his footing. He'd show up to family dinners with stories of grand plans, real estate ventures, tech startups, you name it. None of them ever panned out, and our parents would inevitably ask me to talk some sense into him. The family gatherings became predictable. Liam would show up late, flash his charming smile, and spend the night cracking jokes at my expense. Everyone laughed because Liam was funny, and I could take it. "It's just Liam being Liam," they'd say. But underneath the humor, I could feel the sharp edge of his words, the way he tried to chip away at the image I'd built. When I introduced Emma to the family, I could see the shift in Liam immediately. He turned on the charm, as he always did. But there was something different this time. He wasn't just trying to get under my skin. He was trying to claim something that wasn't his. I shrugged it off because Emma didn't seem to pay him much attention, and I trusted her. That was my mistake. I don't think Liam ever stopped resenting me. Every achievement of mine felt like a spotlight on his failures. Every compliment I received was, in his mind, a reminder of what he didn't have. Over the years, I tried to bridge the gap between us. I offered him help when he was struggling, defended him when others wrote him off, and included him in my life even when it wasn't convenient. I wanted to believe that we could have the kind of bond people expected us to have. But Liam didn't want a brother. He wanted a rival. Looking back, I can see the warning signs now. The way Liam's jokes about Emma got a little too personal. The way he'd show up at our house unannounced, always with some flimsy excuse. The way he'd linger just a little too long when saying goodbye. But I brushed it all aside, convincing myself that he wouldn't cross that line. He was my brother. After all, blood is thicker than water, right? Except Liam never saw it that way. To him, I wasn't his brother. I was the benchmark he could never reach, the obstacle he could never overcome. And when he saw an opportunity to take something from me, he didn't hesitate. He didn't just betray me. He made it personal. He wanted me to see him win, to feel the sting of losing for once. That's why he smirked when I caught him in my bed. He thought he'd finally found a way to beat me. But Liam underestimated me. He always has. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this unscathed. I'd spent my whole life cleaning up his messes, letting him get away with his little victories. Not this time. This time, I'd make sure he understood exactly what it meant to lose everything. As I watched him panic, fumbling with his phone to call Clara, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about Emma or the affair. It was about years of pent-up resentment finally coming to a head. Liam thought he could take what was mine and walk away unscathed. But for the first time in his life, he was about to face the consequences of his actions. And I wasn't going to lift a finger to help him. Looking back, I wonder when it started. The affair, I mean, not just the physical part of it, but the connection that grew between Emma and Liam, the one I was too blind to see. Was it that first family dinner where Liam turned up late, flashing his trademark grin and turning every head in the room? Or was it later, during those casual visits when I wasn't home, and Liam always seemed to have an excuse to drop by? Emma met Liam a few weeks after we started dating. I'd always been upfront about having a twin brother, though I hadn't gone into detail about our complicated relationship. At the time, I didn't think it mattered. Emma was warm and grounded, the kind of woman who made everyone around her feel at ease. Liam, on the other hand, was unpredictable. Charming one moment, insufferable the next. I didn't think they'd have much to talk about, but I underestimated Liam's ability to command attention. The first time they met, we were at a family dinner. I introduced Emma to everyone, and she was an instant hit. My mom adored her. My dad gave his quiet approval, and my cousins fawned over her. But Liam? He acted like he'd known her for years. He cracked jokes, teased her about her taste in movies, and even made a bet with her over some silly trivia question. Emma laughed at his antics, and I didn't think much of it. That was just Liam being Liam. In the months that followed, Liam started showing up more often. At first, it seemed harmless. He'd drop by to borrow tools or pick up something he'd left behind during a previous visit. But then the visits became more frequent, and his excuses became flimsier. I was in the neighborhood, he'd say, or, I just wanted to check in on you guys. I didn't mind too much. I wanted to believe that Liam was trying to reconnect, to build the kind of relationship we'd never really had as brothers. And Emma, ever the gracious host, welcomed him with open arms. I didn't notice the shift right away. It was subtle at first, Emma laughing a little too hard at Liam's jokes, Liam lingering a little too long during goodbyes. Then there were the private conversations. I'd come home to find them talking in the living room, their heads close together, their voices low. Just catching up, they'd say, and I believed them. Why wouldn't I? Emma was my wife, and Liam was my brother. I trusted them both. There was one moment, though, that stuck with me. We were hosting a barbecue, and Liam had brought his usual flair, flipping burgers with one hand while making everyone laugh with the other. At one point, Emma spilled something on her shirt, and Liam immediately jumped in to help, grabbing a napkin and dabbing at the stain. It was innocent enough, but the way they looked at each other for just a second too long made my stomach churn. I brushed it off, telling myself I was imagining things. But the seed of doubt was planted. Emma and I had always been solid. At least, that's what I thought. She wasn't the type to complain or pick fights, but now I wonder if that was part of the problem. Did she feel neglected? Unappreciated? I worked long hours, sure, but it was for us, for the life we were building together. I thought she understood that. I thought she was happy. But maybe Liam offered her something I couldn't. Attention, spontaneity, an escape from the routine of our marriage. It's not easy to admit that your wife might have found something in someone else, especially when that someone else is your own twin. The betrayal isn't just about the act itself. It's about the choices that led to it. The stolen glances, the quiet conversations, the moments of connection that I wasn't a part of. They made choices, small, seemingly insignificant choices, that built a bridge between them and pushed me further away. I think the worst part is knowing that Liam didn't just betray me. He used his understanding of me to get to Emma. He knew my weaknesses, my blind spots. He knew when I was too busy to notice the cracks forming. And Emma let him in, knowing full well what it would mean for us, for our marriage. By the time I caught them in bed together, their connection was no longer a question. It was undeniable. Liam's smirk when he saw me wasn't just arrogance. It was a declaration. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was proud of what he'd taken from me, as if this betrayal was some twisted form of victory. But Emma? Her face told a different story. There was guilt, sure, but also something else, regret. Not for the betrayal itself, but for getting caught. She had made her choice long before that moment, and now she was left to face the consequences. Whatever connection they had, whatever spark or thrill she thought she'd found with Liam, it wasn't worth what she was about to lose. And that's what I held on to as I walked out of that bedroom. They could have their connection, their shared secrets and stolen moments. I didn't want any part of it. Let them deal with the fallout. I had bigger things to focus on. My dignity, my sanity, and my future without them. The moment the words left my mouth, I just sent your wife a video of you too. Everything changed. Liam's smirk, that smug, infuriating smirk, evaporated faster than I could have hoped. His face twisted in shock and panic, and for the first time in our lives, I had the upper hand. What did you do? Liam stammered, reaching for his phone with trembling hands. He fumbled with the screen, muttering under his breath as he desperately tried to call Clara, his wife. Clara, strong, intelligent, fiercely independent Clara, wasn't the type to tolerate betrayal, and Liam knew it. His voice cracked as he said her name, his bravado crumbling before my eyes. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching him unravel. "Go ahead," I said, my tone cold and deliberate. "Call her. See how that works out for you." The phone rang once, twice, and then Clara picked up. Even from where I stood, I could hear the venom in her voice. "What the hell is this, Liam?" she barked. "What am I looking at?" Liam's face turned a shade paler, and he stammered, "Clara, listen. It's not what it looks like." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh at that. Not what it looks like. The audacity. Liam shot me a glare, but it held no power. He knew he was cornered, and there was no way out. Not what it looks like? Clara's voice was loud enough now that even Emma could hear it from the corner where she stood, frozen and pale. "You're in bed with your brother's wife, Liam. What part of this isn't what it looks like?" Liam floundered, searching for words, but Clara wasn't done. "You're disgusting. Do you hear me? Disgusting. Don't come home. Don't even think about it. I'm done." The call ended with a click, and the silence that followed was deafening. Liam stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, as if willing Clara to call back. But she wouldn't. He knew it. I knew it. Emma finally found her voice, whispering, "Liam, I didn't mean for this to happen." I cut her off. "Don't bother," I said, my gaze fixed on Liam. "Neither of you meant for this to happen, right? It just did. Isn't that the story?" Liam turned to me, his expression shifting from panic to anger. "Why would you do this?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "You could have just talked to me. You didn't have to drag Clara into this." I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "Why would I do this? Are you serious, Liam? You're standing in my house, in my bedroom, with my wife, and you're asking me why I exposed you? You don't get to make demands anymore." He tried to hold my gaze, but he couldn't. His shoulders slumped, and he sank onto the edge of the bed like a man who just realized how far he'd fallen. "Clara's going to leave me," he muttered, almost to himself. "Good," I said bluntly. "She deserves better than you." Emma stepped forward then, her voice trembling. "Noah, please, I turned to her, cutting her off again. "Don't. Just don't. I don't want to hear it. Not right now." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but I felt nothing. Whatever love or sympathy I might have had for her was buried under the weight of her betrayal. The room was suffocating, filled with their guilt and my rage. I needed to get out. Turning to Liam, I said, "You need to leave. Now." Liam didn't move at first, still clutching his phone like it was some kind of lifeline. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked weakly. "That's not my problem," I replied. "You made your bed. Now lie in it, just not in mine." He stood slowly, casting a glance at Emma, who looked as lost as he did. But neither of them said another word as they shuffled out of the room. I followed them to the door, watching as Liam fumbled with his car keys. As he climbed into his car, I leaned against the doorframe and said, "Oh, and Liam? Clara's a smart woman. She'll make sure you lose everything. You might want to prepare for that." He didn't respond, didn't even look at me. He just started the car and drove away, leaving me standing there in the doorway, my mind racing. I didn't know what came next. I didn't have a plan yet. But for now, I was content with one thing. Liam's smugness was gone, replaced by fear and regret. He wasn't the one in control anymore. I was. And I intended to keep it that way. When the door closed behind them, the silence in the house was deafening. I stood there for a moment, staring at the space they had just occupied, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions raging inside me. Anger, betrayal, sadness, relief. It was a strange mix, but the one thing I didn't feel was regret. Exposing Liam and Emma for what they had done wasn't just the right thing to do. It was necessary. I walked back to the living room and sank into the couch. My body felt heavy, like all the energy had been drained from me. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I instinctively reached for it. It was a message from Clara. "Thank you for telling me. I'll handle him from here." Short, direct. Clara wasn't one to waste words, and that message confirmed what I already knew. Liam's life was about to implode. Clara was a fighter, and she wouldn't let him off easy. For a moment, I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I remembered the way he smirked at me, so sure of his victory. That moment would be etched into my mind forever. I thought about calling my parents. They deserved to know what had happened, didn't they? But then I hesitated. How do you even start that conversation? Hey, Mom and Dad, guess what? Liam's been sleeping with my wife. No, I couldn't do that. Not yet. This was a mess I needed to sort out on my own, at least for now. The hours passed slowly, the house feeling emptier than ever. I wandered into the kitchen, absent-mindedly opening cabinets and closing them again. I wasn't hungry, but I needed to do something, anything, to distract myself. My mind kept replaying the scene over and over, each time amplifying the pain. Emma's betrayal hurt, but Liam's? That cut even deeper. He wasn't just my brother. He was my twin. We'd shared everything, birthdays, childhood memories, inside jokes. And yet, here he was, throwing it all away for what? A fling? A chance to win some imaginary competition he'd been having with me his entire life? I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me when I walked into the bedroom. That smirk. It wasn't just arrogance, it was triumph. Liam had wanted me to see it, to feel the full weight of his betrayal. And that's what stung the most. As the sun began to set, I realized I couldn't sit in this house any longer. It wasn't just the silence, it was the memories. Everywhere I looked, there was a reminder of the life I thought I had. The dining table where Emma and I had shared countless meals. The couch where we binge-watched our favorite shows. Even the bed upstairs, now tainted by their betrayal. I grabbed my keys and drove aimlessly for a while, letting the hum of the engine drown out my thoughts. Eventually, I found myself parked outside Clara's house. I didn't plan to come here, but it felt right. I got out of the car and knocked on the door. Clara opened it, her face a mixture of anger and exhaustion. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped aside to let me in. I followed her to the living room, where she sank into an armchair and gestured for me to sit. "Do you want a drink?" she asked, her voice flat. "Sure," I said, though I wasn't sure what I needed more, whiskey or water. She returned with 2 glasses of wine, handing one to me before sitting down again. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us staring at the floor. Finally, Clara spoke. "I always thought he might do something like this. I didn't think it would be with her." I nodded, taking a sip of the wine. I didn't think Liam could sink this low, but I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Clara laughed bitterly. "He's always been jealous of you, hasn't he? I mean, I've seen it over the years. The way he tries to one-up you, the way he talks about you. I just didn't think he'd go this far." "Neither did I admitted. "But here we are." We talked for hours, sharing stories and filling in the gaps. Clara told me how Liam had been acting distant lately, how he'd started coming home later and later. I told her about the subtle signs I'd missed with Emma, the private conversations, the lingering glances. By the time I left, we both felt a little lighter, though the pain was far from gone. When I got back home, the house was just as I'd left it, quiet and suffocating. But now, there was a sense of resolve building inside me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Liam and Emma had made their choices, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. I wasn't sure what the next steps would look like, divorce papers, family fallout, endless explanations. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this break me. Liam thought he'd won, but the game wasn't over. Not yet. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and endless thoughts. I knew what had to be done. I couldn't stay married to Emma after what she'd done, and I certainly couldn't maintain any semblance of a relationship with Liam. The betrayal had cut too deep, leaving wounds that even time wouldn't heal. Filing for divorce wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only option. I contacted a lawyer the morning after the fallout. The conversation was clinical, devoid of the emotional storm I felt brewing inside. The lawyer asked questions about assets, custody. Thankfully, Emma and I didn't have children, and evidence. When I mentioned the video, they assured me that it would make things swift and definitive. Emma didn't fight me on it, which was surprising. She seemed almost resigned when I handed her the papers. I deserve this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For once, I agreed with her. She packed her things quietly over the next few days, each box she carried out feeling like a piece of closure. But Liam? Liam didn't make it easy. It started with phone calls, dozens of them. At first, they were angry. Why did you have to send the video to Clara? He shouted the first time I picked up. You've ruined my life. I hung up. He called again. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Noah. It just happened. Can't we move past this? Move past this? The sheer audacity of those words nearly made me laugh. I told him never to contact me again, but Liam wasn't one to take no for an answer. When the calls stopped working, he showed up at my door. I didn't let him in. Instead, I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching him squirm. What do you want, Liam? I need to talk to you. Face to face, he said, looking genuinely desperate. There's nothing to talk about, I replied coldly. You made your choices. Now live with them. Noah, please, he begged, but I slammed the door in his face. It wasn't out of anger, not entirely. It was about self-preservation. Letting Liam back into my life, even for a moment, felt like inviting a snake into my home. Meanwhile, Clara was taking Liam to court. She wasn't just filing for divorce. She was going for everything. Alimony, a share of his assets, even the house. And honestly, I was rooting for her. If anyone deserved to walk away with nothing, it was Liam. Our parents, of course, got involved. They were devastated when they found out, though not entirely surprised. We always knew Liam was difficult. My mom admitted during one of our strained conversations. But this? I don't even know what to say. Dad was less forgiving. He's dead to me, he said bluntly. You don't do that to family. It should have felt good to have their support, but it didn't. Nothing about this felt good. Emma, for her part, tried to stay out of the spotlight. She moved in with a friend and avoided contact with anyone in my circle. Occasionally, I get a message from her, an apology, a plea for forgiveness, but I never responded. What was the point? Forgiving her wouldn't change what she'd done. The legal proceedings moved quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence against both Emma and Liam. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't happiness, exactly, but it was close. Clara and I kept in touch throughout it all. She was a force to be reckoned with, handling the situation with a grace and strength I could only admire. We met a few times to exchange updates and vent about our shared frustrations. Those conversations were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this mess. One evening, over coffee, she asked me, "Do you ever think they regret it?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. I think Liam regrets getting caught. I think Emma regrets losing the life we built. But do they regret what they did? I don't know. And honestly, I don't care. Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. Yeah, I feel the same way. By the time everything was settled, divorce finalized, assets divided, ties cut, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The weight of their betrayal was still there, but it was lighter now, less suffocating. I'd survived the storm, and for the first time in months, I could see a glimmer of light on the horizon. Liam and Emma, on the other hand, weren't faring so well. Liam lost everything. His marriage, his reputation, and a good chunk of his savings thanks to Clara's relentless pursuit of justice. Emma wasn't much better off, living in a small apartment and working a job she clearly hated. And me? I was rebuilding. Slowly but surely, I was finding my way back to myself. The wounds they left would take time to heal, but I was determined not to let them define me. I was free, and that freedom was worth every painful step of the journey. After the legal dust settled, life felt eerily quiet. The divorce was finalized, the assets were divided, and Emma was officially gone. Yet, the emptiness in the house was suffocating. Every room felt haunted by memories. Both the good ones that now felt like lies and the bad ones I hadn't realized were forming until it was too late. I didn't want to live in a place so deeply tied to betrayal, so I started making changes. The bedroom was first. The bed, the curtains, even the paint on the walls. It all had to go. I tore it down piece by piece, replacing it with things that felt more like me. It wasn't just about redecorating. It was about reclaiming my space, my identity, my life. But healing wasn't as simple as swapping out furniture. The betrayal left scars deeper than I expected. Some nights, I'd sit on the couch and replay the scene in my head. Liam's smug smirk, Emma's pale face, the sound of Clara's furious voice on the phone. It was a loop I couldn't shut off. Clara and I kept in touch. It started with updates on the legal proceedings, what the lawyers were saying, how the divorce settlements were progressing. But over time, our conversations grew more personal. We shared our frustrations, our pain, and even moments of dark humor about the mess Liam and Emma had created. "I can't believe I married someone so blind to consequences," Clara said during one of our calls. "You and me both," I replied. "But hey, at least they have each other now." We both laughed, though there was no joy in it. Liam and Emma's downward spiral was hard to ignore. Liam lost everything. His wife, his reputation, his financial stability. Clara made sure of that. Her lawyer was relentless, and Liam ended up paying dearly, literally and figuratively. He had to sell his car, move into a cramped apartment, and take on multiple part-time jobs just to scrape by. Emma didn't fare much better. She moved into a tiny, run-down apartment across town and picked up a job at a local cafe. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she wasn't handling things well. She looked tired and withdrawn, a shadow of the vibrant woman I once knew. One day, Clara and I met for coffee, and the conversation turned reflective. "Do you think they're happy now?" she asked, stirring her drink absently. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I don't think they even know what happiness is. They thought their affair was exciting, something worth risking everything for. But now, they're just dealing with the fallout. Clara nodded. "It's funny, isn't it? They thought they were so clever, so untouchable, and now they've got nothing." It was true. Liam and Emma had thought they could build something out of betrayal, that their connection could withstand the wreckage they caused. But the weight of their choices was too much. Their relationship crumbled under the pressure. I heard through the grapevine that they'd started arguing constantly, their once secret affair now a public disaster. Liam, who had always relied on his charm to get by, found himself alone. People who once admired him for his charisma now saw him for what he was, a man willing to betray his own brother. Emma, meanwhile, seemed to drift through life, unable to hold on to anything meaningful. As for me, I was rebuilding. Slowly, piece by piece, I started to find myself again. I threw myself into work, rediscovered old hobbies, and spent more time with friends who reminded me of the person I used to be. I even started volunteering at a local shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. Clara became a big part of that journey. Our shared experience created a bond that was hard to describe. She understood the pain, the anger, and the lingering doubts in a way no one else could. Over time, our conversations became less about Liam and Emma and more about ourselves. One evening, as we walked through a quiet park, Clara said something that stayed with me. "You know, I used to think what they did would define me forever, that it would be this black mark on my life. But now, I see it differently. They're just a chapter, not the whole story." She was right. Liam and Emma were a part of my story, but they weren't the end of it. Their betrayal had hurt me deeply, but it also forced me to grow in ways I never thought possible. Eventually, the pain began to fade. It didn't disappear completely. Some wounds never fully heal, but it stopped consuming me. I learned to laugh again, to find joy in the small things, and to open myself up to the possibility of a brighter future. As for Liam and Emma, they became distant memories, remnants of a past I no longer cared to dwell on. Their lives continued to spiral. Liam lost job after job, his once celebrated charm now useless. Emma, burdened by guilt and regret, faded into obscurity. Their relationship, built on lies and betrayal, couldn't survive the reality they created. I moved forward, leaving their chaos behind. My days became brighter, my steps lighter. I wasn't defined by their actions anymore. They were just two people who made choices that destroyed their lives, but not mine. I had reclaimed my story, and I wasn't going to let them write another word of it. Freedom. That's what I felt as I closed that chapter. True freedom. For the first time in a long time, I was living for myself. And for that, I was grateful. Life after betrayal isn't about erasing the pain. It's about learning how to live with it and move forward. As time passed, the wounds left by Emma and Liam began to heal. They didn't disappear entirely, scars like that never do, but they became less raw, less consuming. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again, like I could live without constantly looking over my shoulder or questioning everything I thought I knew. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, not just physically but emotionally. The house I had shared with Emma felt like a museum of memories I no longer wanted to keep, so I made it mine. I replaced the furniture, repainted the walls, and turned it into a space that reflected who I was now, not who I had been with her. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about reclaiming my identity, piece by piece. My focus shifted to things that truly mattered. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, picked up hobbies I'd long forgotten, and even started mentoring at a local youth center. It was rewarding to invest my energy into something meaningful, something untainted by the betrayal I'd endured. Slowly but surely, I began to rediscover who I was outside of the shadow of Liam and Emma's actions. Clara remained a constant presence during this time. What started as shared pain over our ex-spouses grew into a genuine friendship. We didn't need to talk about Liam and Emma anymore. They had become little more than footnotes in our conversations. Instead, we shared dreams, goals, and laughter. Clara had an infectious optimism about her, a belief that life could still be beautiful even after everything we'd been through. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sun set, Clara said something that struck a chord. "You know, I used to think this was the end, that Liam's betrayal would define me forever. But now, I see it as a new beginning. A chance to start fresh." She was right. What Liam and Emma had done didn't have to be the defining moment of my life. It was a chapter, sure, but not the whole story. I had the power to decide how the rest of my story would unfold. Liam and Emma's lives, on the other hand, continued to spiral. I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. Liam bouncing between jobs, struggling to stay afloat financially. Emma drifting from one temporary living situation to another, her once vibrant personality dulled by regret. Their relationship didn't last long under the weight of its own toxicity. Without the thrill of secrecy and betrayal, they had nothing to hold them together. They fell apart as quickly as they had come together. There was a time when I might have felt satisfaction in their misery, but now, I just felt indifference. Their downfall was their own doing, and it was no longer my concern. I had more important things to focus on, my own happiness, my own future. As the years passed, I found myself genuinely content. My friendships deepened, my work flourished, and my days were filled with moments of joy and peace. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they served as a reminder of my resilience, of the strength it took to move forward. Clara and I remained close, our bond growing stronger with time. She had her own journey of healing, her own story to write, but we supported each other in ways no one else could. There were moments when I wondered if our friendship might evolve into something more, but I didn't rush it. I wanted to be sure that I was ready, sure that I wouldn't carry the baggage of the past into something new. One day, Clara said, "You deserve to be happy, Noah. Truly happy. Don't let what they did hold you back." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I had been focused on surviving, on rebuilding, that I hadn't stopped to think about what happiness could look like for me now. Slowly, I allowed myself to dream again, to imagine a future filled with love, trust, and possibility. By the time I fully embraced this new chapter, Liam and Emma were distant memories. I didn't know what had become of them, and I didn't care. Their choices had shaped their lives, just as mine had shaped mine. The difference was, I had chosen to rise above, to build something better. As I looked ahead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Hope for new beginnings, for meaningful connections, for a life that wasn't defined by betrayal but by growth and resilience. This was my story, and I was ready to write the next chapter. It wouldn't be perfect, life never is, but it would be mine, and that was enough.